All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Joanna Peters, co-chair with Marco Oropesa of the IERG Global Leadership Webinar Series. First off, we have some announcements for the coming month. Next Tuesday, the New York chapter is hosting speaker and 2015 NACD Top 100 Director, Mike Mandy. We encourage you to register and join Jacques, Mike, and your New York chapter friends at 99 Park Avenue for this go-to event. Also a reminder to make your IERG board nomination by November 1. You can suggest an IERG colleague or yourself. And if you will be in Chicago November 15th, the IERG Chicago chapter is holding its 6th annual international forum with a distinguished group of speakers. Today, you will hear about the European Advisory Board opportunity and how and why members should access this opportunity. Today's distinguished speaker is Jacques De Jager, recommended by our member, John Lowe. Jacques is head of executive search at Trenkwalder, a leading recruiting firm in 19 countries in Central and Eastern Europe. His clients are leading private equity and venture capital investors, top professional and financial firms. Jacques has built supervisory and advisory boards and executive management teams all over Europe. Based in Budapest and before that London for many years, he has built and run board solution practices. We do have time for questions at the end, but Jacques is interested in fielding questions as we go along. So if you have a question during the presentation, please write it in and Ruth will read it. Otherwise, mute your phones until the end of the presentation. This webinar is recorded and the link will be available online at a later time. Over to you, Jacques.
Jenna, thank you very much. Good afternoon all. I just quickly want to get my screen shared so you can see. Just 1 minute. And is it all good now, Ruth?
Flip it back the other way. It was perfect before. Swap display. Perfect.
Got it. Fantastic. Good afternoon all. It's a privilege to be with you this afternoon. Greetings from a very dark, grey, miserable Budapest. Yes, the Indian summer continues, but we do have a bit of a respite in the warm weather and heading into the Christmas season shortly. So it's supposed to be grey and dark and miserable. So it's evening time here, and it's a pleasure to be with you. So hello, everyone, and thanks for the privilege, Joanna and Ruth. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about board opportunities in Europe, the who, the what, and the why. Janice made a very eloquent presentation about me. Thank you very much. Let's quickly go over the agenda. A couple of points I would like to raise today. One is sources of board roles in Europe and Middle East. So where can you find them? Why is this important to you as you're sitting in the US? I'll share with you also my experience in sourcing board members from the US for European boards. And then, of course, most importantly, how to source board roles in the region. And then if we have time, I'll quickly give you a helicopter view of the board set up across the Middle East and emerging Europe. That's based on a survey we did about 2 years ago. It's still current. And, of course, Q&A afterwards, but as Joanna said, very happy to field your questions during the conversation. I'd like to make it interactive. It's important. It's all about you. So do feel free to pop in your question, and Ruth will pick it up and moderate. So let's go into the first part of the presentation, sources of board roles. Now, there are generally, indirect, direct channels, and I will distinguish between them specifically so you can see. But when I talk about indirect channels. These would, for example, be job boards and social media. And if I refer to social media here, it's primarily the likes of LinkedIn, which has become a very major recruitment portal for companies across the world, specifically in the more kind of Western part. There are specialized board recruiters. Headhunters are not all equal, and therefore we will spend a little time on this later in the presentation when we talk about board recruiters, and they are specialized. And then, of course, in capital letters is your professional network, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. From the direct channels, of course, we have public boards. Now, to get into a public board can be difficult. The public board scene is still a little bit like an old boys club, and you'll get a call from the chairman to invite you, so it's pretty hard to get in there. But obviously, those are very important and lucrative seats to have. Family-owned businesses. In Europe specifically, it is a rather significant focus on board-level activity, and I'll share with you later just in a minute or two where some of these board opportunities can be coming from. But family-owned business is pretty big in the likes of Germany, Turkey, where a large part of the economy is dominated by family-owned businesses. And in the Middle East, for example, but 90% of the firms are SMEs. So it's a very, very big area. And why this is important, sometimes you have first, second, third generation family, and as some of you may know, the kids grow up, they're part of the business, or they come to a point where, Dad, I just don't want to be part of the business. I want to go to Harvard or do something different. And then they start sitting with a succession issue, specifically if in this situation where the business starts looking for external investment, the private equity investor moves in, and then they want to shake things up a bit, and the board needs to be changed and amended, and this is often a big transition for the business. But this is where I certainly have seen a big chunk of the board opportunities arising in emerging Europe and the Middle East. This is a very important one, the private equity and venture capital space. These individuals are very, very active in sourcing advisory board members for their portfolio companies. And I've been working with a number of them in the region. In some parts of Europe, it is still in infancy. Boards are small. Few external investors or advisors are on the board. That is changing very fast, specifically in a situation where a number of these companies are, the reason why they get a private equity backing in the first place is for them to expand. Now, the PE investor would like to walk away from the investment in a couple of years at a multiple investment return, and therefore things have to happen. And consequently, the only way it can do is for them to start getting advisory board members to help guide the business, and invariably a lot of these board members will come from the likes of the US, and I'll explain to that shortly. Another interesting channel for sourcing board opportunities would be bespoke channels such as advisory board architects, and this is an interesting outfit. It originated from a C-suite exec in Wall Street, got tired of the establishment, and he saw an opportunity to start building advisory boards. They have subsequently established a big presence in Barcelona, Germany, and in the Middle East, where they have a representation, and they work with and create advisory boards. So they basically, the company outsources the whole board function to them, and they bring in advisory board members as the need arises, and they get rid of them when they no longer serve the purpose, and they basically coordinate the whole thing. So they are constantly in the market. So it would be good for you to make a note of them and reach out to them perhaps, and register and send your resume over to them and let them know that you are interested. Career Angels is a Polish group. They work also across the region. They often also publish sort of the hidden job market opportunities. And then, based on many discussions I've had with the private equity members that I know, they use the likes of Alpha Sites, Director Bank UK, GLG, which is the Gerson Lehman Group's GLG Research. You can register as with them as a council member, and the council member, you have specific expertise in a specific industry or functional space. And very often private equity players would look at, first of all, their own network, then they go to these specific forums to try and find investors. And this is, from my point of view, a big competitor for me, but this is where they go, and therefore I would strongly suggest that you look at those as well. And for those of you that may not be that active, you are looking for your first board appointment, often a good place to start is building a board portfolio, and you start with NGOs, non-for-profit boards. That normally is good because you get it on your resume, because once you have board experience, it makes it easier to be considered for the next board level. Rather than, if you don't have any board experience specifically, and I'm not sure if there are any of you on the call, but certainly good place to start. But if you're not, it's still good to start as a subject matter expert. Why is this important to you? Well, first and foremost, you are sitting in the biggest market in the world, the most sophisticated, and for European firms, that's often the place where they want to go and can't get to. And you are in a very privileged environment where your background and your skills in your markets is certainly far deeper and bigger than your peer group in this part of the world. And my clients have often asked me to look in the US for people that can bring board members to them. I'll give you a specific example. I was talking to a small Hungarian venture capital based firm. They were big into 3D animation, and they knew that their target market would be the large gaming industry, media, automotive perhaps, and these industries are just not that big or prevalent on the European market. The US is large in that space. And I reached out and I found a fantastic board member for them in Silicon Valley who, on the very first day got them onto CNBC prime time. So there are a number of private equity firms, VC firms looking for help with getting their companies into the US. Now, the benefits of board roles, many of you are sitting on board, so I'm preaching to the converted here. But this is an excellent post-corporate career where, thanks, I don't need the 8 to 6 and 7 day a week stint anymore. I would like to have a bit more flexibility in what I do. I would like to give back and use my expertise and experience. I want to be stimulated intellectually. I want to have diversity in my career. And this often, if we talk about diversity, this often brings, it's a bit of a sideline to start looking at sort of post-retirement. What are you going to do? But many of my candidates are executives in this kind of last 10 years of their career and looking for what else can they do. And invariably getting those board seats are becoming a very, very big focus for execs, as you know, because you are on the call today. If we look at the European and Middle Eastern context, let's look at the different types of board roles that we've seen. We've seen the classic non-executive director on public boards versus advisory board. Now, in the European context, certainly my impression is there's a far bigger emphasis and a need for advisory board members rather than non-exec directors. First of all, to get a non-exec on board, often you have to go through regulatory processes and certain vetting. It's time-consuming, registering them, get the board statutes with the lawyers. Can be complicated, but the advisory board is basically a consultative role. You basically circumvent the larger regulatory issues. You bring value immediately to the business, and therefore often it is less cumbersome, less tedious, and more rewarding, and also gives you bigger flexibility. And certainly out of all the positions I've filled, all but one was advisory board. Only one was a non-exec director on the board. Then, of course, you have public versus private boards. And public boards are listed companies, difficult to get into sometimes, great to be on, very lucrative. However, you are aware, of course, of the liability issues. In some cases, it can be quite big, and a lot of executives would prefer to go the advisory board route rather than the sort of non-exec director on the public board. It is just too risky, and they just don't want to be part of it. So there's an increased tendency to rather to go for private boards. And then, of course, the not-for-profit boards, and those are do not need to have any further explanation. Advisory boards are really understated for the simple reason that a number of the companies, and I've spent many hours educating my clients why advisory boards are needed. Number one, you have a company, sir, that is doing pretty well, but you probably want to get into the US. And they've hired marketing people, and they've burned the marketing budget, in no time at all, and they still haven't got the results to show for it. But once you're bringing an advisory board, you bring someone with the gray hair, someone with very deep industry expertise. That often is very well received. And advisory, so a lot of the private equity companies and family-owned businesses are certainly waking up to and opening up to the concept of advisory boards. It is an easier way to bring external expertise into the board rather than go for the classic non-exec director. It's quicker and can be fit for purpose. An advisory board can very often quickly be assembled on as a very specific assignment, which can last for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, whereas non-exec director is obviously for a longer term period. But generally, this is where the focus is in our part of the world, and this is where we have seen the biggest attraction. You may ask, why Middle East and or emerging Europe? Now, I just want to qualify, I'm not excluding Western Europe from this. Companies like Austria, Germany, France, even to a large extent, advisory boards, non-exec directors, they are clearly very prevalent, perhaps more so than in the emerging world. But the emerging markets, that's where the opportunities are. This is where they need it most. This is where these companies are perhaps less sophisticated, genuinely emerging, lots of money being thrown at them from all avenues, and this is where the fastest growth is currently being recorded. And consequently, companies like the Middle East or even Russia, they often need that Western knowledge. How do I do that? Bring best practice. And I'll give you another example. I had a client in Bulgaria. It was a well-named real estate group. They were doing well, but they knew that they were quickly reaching a plateau in the business, and it was pretty hard for them to imagine how they can grow more. And clearly they knew what they knew based on their market standards and practices. So they mandated me to go and find a board member, which again I found in the US, who happened to spend some time on the European continent and emerging Europe. And for them, this individual brought tremendous depth of expertise on what is happening internationally, what is the best practice out there, what are they not doing that they're supposed to be doing, what should they stop doing right now. And they just don't have that level of skill in this part of the world. And it was a great success story. Within a very short period of time, the value by the board member quickly proved to be worthwhile, much more so than the fees they paid. And it was absolutely a resounding success, and I do believe this individual is still sitting on the board. How is, of course, a different subject altogether. There are generally two sources of board opportunities. This would be the public domain. If I say public domain, these are positions that are being advertised on any of the social media platforms or directly by the companies. And then, in my mind, certainly my experience, the remaining 80% is what we refer to as the hidden job market. The hidden job market are those positions that are not being advertised, not visible, and entirely dependent on either a headhunter helping to find it discreetly, professional network, and boards are still today largely assembled through professional network. And then, of course, direct approach. I had a statistic from the career angels in Poland, and they, based on their 2015 statistics, out of the non-public domain jobs, 50% of the positions were filled through direct speculative approach to companies, and we can talk about that shortly. About 30% were filled through headhunters, and about 20% through your own network. If we look at the social media factor, this should not be understated. And why is this important? Well, this gives you the visibility that you need for people to get to know you, find out who you are, where you are. And there are, of course, a couple of major, call it career platforms out there. Facebook and Google Plus, it's becoming increasingly popular despite feelings to the contrary, but from a recruiting point of view, definitely growing in status, but still today largely focused on the Gen X and millennial category. Twitter is a nice place for you to showcase knowledge, to get intelligent communiques out there. Obviously, Twitter is a nice place for ranting, and I would strongly advise you against that, and I'll explain to you in a minute. And then, of course, LinkedIn, which is the mother of all social media platforms. In the case of Germany, Austria, Switzerland, Xing is a very prevalent platform. About 80% of people on Xing also have a profile on LinkedIn, but there is a good 20-30% of people on that platform that are nowhere else to be found. So if you are interested to be visible and get known and start making a network in the sort of DACH region, I strongly urge you to consider getting onto the Xing network. You are what you tweet. And this is, I don't want to stay in this too long, but I think this is very important in today's day and age if we think of the US election that's going on right now and the storm raging on Twitter about that. People today are truly evaluated and judged based on their social media profiles. Many employers, when they do some vetting, and there are very specific tools out there that can extract your social media presence, your internet fit, as we call it, and they can look and see what you participated on LinkedIn, what your comments are, what you liked, what you posted on Facebook, whatever. So a word of advice, if you are a professional who's looking and want to keep professional, refrain from things that could tarnish your image. This is very, very important. This is where people can see who you are in the background. So if they want to do background check, this is where they go. More importantly, visibility as a subject matter expert is very, very helpful to use social media platforms for the specific purpose. Why is that also? Let's consider the value of your network. Not all contacts are created equal. You have very powerful people in your network who have a better potential of endorsing you. Think of it this way. If you look at your network connections, your first, how many of them do you have their mobile number and will pick up your phone when you call them at 6 p.m. in the evening? Just asking, because that really will determine whether those are a high endorser or no endorsement value whatsoever. So if you are considering building a presence and building a network in Europe to make yourself available as a board member, do take care in building a network that will bring you a high level of endorsement. And I can't stress that enough. Again, not all contacts are created equal. Clearly, those people with whom you have a relationship or a formal connection by far outweighs your contacts, your former peers and employees and your membership team in the company where you work, or informal contacts. Me as a recruiter, it's my job to reach out to people and connect with people, so I probably have more contacts than most people in the corporate sector, and that's fine. But what I've seen interviewing executives, I've seen too many people that have very few contacts outside of their employment, and that will not bring you much joy when you want to start opening doors somewhere else.
Jacques, I have a question,
Yeah.
if it's okay, from John Lowe. He said, what about ABs in LATAM? Any possibilities?
Sorry, this line broke up. Just repeat, Ruth.
John Lowe asked, what about ABs in LATAM? Any possibilities?
Opportunities in Latin America?
Yeah.
I don't focus on that market. However, and I've never searched in that specific market, that is an important market. For example, for the likes of advisory board architects, they focus very strongly on the Latin American market, certainly on the African continent as well. So in this particular case, my advice, John, would be to reach out to those specific organizations who are focusing there. And again, whatever, and I'm going to give you some ideas of whom to contact and where to find these individuals. And my advice would be just do whatever you would do, but find out who those specific people are in Latin America that would be of interest to you. So absolutely, no question about that. On LinkedIn, and I'm not going to go into why LinkedIn and statistics and whatever, just very briefly, LinkedIn is a place where you can showcase yourself as a professional. Your achievements, what you've done, and it normally starts with a good professional photograph. Why is that? First impression. Whenever someone says, John is a candidate, I would suggest you go talk to John. What are they going to do? They're going to go to LinkedIn, search for John Lowe, and then they'll say, get a good background. So that is your advertisement, that is your marketing tool, so best make good use of it. A well-crafted tagline, a summary bio. It's surprising how many people do not have that. And when you, on your bio, the biography with its summary part in your LinkedIn profile is that 100-word summary where you can showcase your functional expertise. So, for example, I'm a senior board member or professional with 25 years of experience in the industrial manufacturing sector. I've managed and relocated plants from South America to North America, spent 15 years in the European market, sat on boards and helped turn companies around, did market entry for emerging market companies into the US. See what I mean? This is where you can showcase your expertise. In other words, what's in the package. Showcase your career and expertise. What have you done? What are you good at? What is your value proposition? And SEO, search engine optimized. Very, very important. If you are currently a board member and you sit in some boards, or maybe you do, maybe you don't, do be sure to make sure you highlight in the areas in your professional expertise where you've worked, or in your summary, put in the keywords that define you as a professional. If you are a financial services expert, if you are consulting, what did you consult on? If you're an industrial person, what area of industry are you working on? Did you have any specific geography expertise? Mention those. The reason why you want to do that is when a recruiter or a headhunter search in a market which is not necessarily known to them, we use very complex keywords in Boolean search strings to identify people, and therefore the more buzzwords are quoted on your profile will enable me to find you. So therefore it's better to rather populate your LinkedIn profile rather than leave it blank or not having one at all, because that means people cannot find you. Know yourself and sell yourself. As you are starting to talk to people, it's clearly, what are your strengths. So if you are looking for a board role, first of all, board roles, specifically advisory board roles, are very clearly defined. I'm looking for someone with specific industry expertise, with specific functional expertise, and if possible, specific geography expertise. So therefore, those must be outlined. You need to know those, and the market need to know them. So as you are talking to people, you need to tell them what your strengths are. It's not about I'm a visionary or I'm a great leader, or the soft skills do not need to be mentioned. What are you good at? And what makes you unique? What makes you different than Tom around the corner? If you are an industrial expert, or if you are in FMCG, in food storage, what makes you different and unique? What have you done that's really amazing? Because that obviously would bring attractiveness to your specific profile. The more attractive your profile, the more unique your profile, the better chance you have if someone says, wow, I need to have that. And let me be clear, within the European context, each and every one of my mandates were very specific. And I'm always looking for specific expertise. And therefore, if that expertise is on your CV or on your LinkedIn profile or wherever you post it, if I have access to that information, it makes it so much easier for me to find you and for people to evaluate your fit. Your key areas of expertise, as I mentioned, and what's your value proposition, what's in it for them. Let me quickly talk to you about direct approach and give you some ideas who to talk to. Headhunters, as I said earlier, we are not all equal. Do your research. If you want to go into the German market, if you want to go into the UK, if you want to go to Central Europe, pick your market, pick the top search firms, and find out which of those headhunters are responsible for board level recruitment. The rest would not matter. You need to do your research and be specific when you approach them. Do register at relevant forums. As I said earlier, Director Bank in the UK, Alpha Sites, Advisory Board Architects, and there are the GLG Research. Do register there, because one of the areas where the next one, private equity companies, very often when they make an acquisition, the first person they look for is during the due diligence process, find me an industry expert who can help me with the due diligence to make sure whether this company is a worthwhile investment, whether they have a market, whether they have a product, and whether it's worthwhile. So they will always bring in an industry expert, and if they don't have one in their network, so you can get onto the network, and we can talk about that in a minute. What normally happens in the private equity space, when this due diligence works well and you've done a sterling job, invariably you'll be offered an advisory board seat. That's just the way it goes. Just want to go back on the private equity. Obviously, there are a number of good American-originated private equity firms who are very prevalent in Europe, and these will be the likes of Blackstone, Warburg Pincus, Advent International, Carlyle, CVC Capital, Sun Capital, Riverstone. And then if you look at Riverside, which is also US origin, but they are very, very prevalent on the markets here. Enterprise Investors, US board, they are extremely active in the Polish, Central European markets, Russia even, Stans, Mid-Europa partners, Franklin Temple Derby, Innova, Abraj Capital in the Middle East, Bridgepoint, 3i. These are some of the names. And if you go to the what was previously referred to as the European Venture Capital Association, today they call investeurope.eu. You can search for members there. And when you do the direct approach, as I said earlier, of 100% of roles that were filled statistically by this company, 50% were through direct approach. So yes, it is perfectly okay for you as an executive to reach out to these individuals directly. How do you do that? First of all, you find out who they are. How? You go to LinkedIn, you search the company, and you see who's the chairman of the company, who's the board member of the company, and you can certainly reach out. And specifically, if there was a news article on Google or CNN about, or CNBC, this company is doing that, this company is doing that, you can certainly reach out to the company. Hello, John, if I may use you. My name is John. I just saw your excellent report on CNBC. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is my expertise. If you are considering building an advisory board to help you with this transition project, I'll be more than happy to make a formal introduction. It's perfectly okay to reach out to them. Find who those contacts are on LinkedIn. It's not rocket science. So if you want to get the email address quickly of someone who works for Bridgepoint, and you see who this person's name is, you can go to Google and you'll type in inverted commas asterisk at bridgepoint.com, close brackets, and you will find just a whole bunch of information. Then you can see, john.low at bridgepoint.com. So if you're looking for the Stephen Hawkins, it's going to be Stephen.Hawkins. So it's very easy to find the email addresses and reach out. Clearly, if you have a network and you have someone who can introduce you there, that's fine. But please do not hesitate to reach out to those individuals directly. It works. Your network, do let them know what you're looking for. If you are speaking to people in the European continent or the Middle East, George, I'm looking for board roles. I'm specifically looking for private equity related contacts in the industrial sector or the pharmaceutical sector or the biomedical sector, life sciences, whatever your speciality is. Be very specific to let them know what you're looking for. And that way, people can become much more helpful. In the last sort of quick 5 minutes before we go for Q&A, I just quickly want to run through a couple of interesting statistics from a survey which we did, just to give you a flavor of what you can expect in the European context. First of all, the average size of the board is really only about 4 to 5 people. If we look at the private equity space and family-owned business, I'm not talking about public boards here. I'm talking about private equity-owned boards and family-owned businesses. 4 to 5 people only, small boards. Average age of board members, sort of between 40 and 55. That seems to be the sort of the general age group, but there are, of course, a couple who are older. Gray hair is still useful. Here's a sticky one. We haven't won the game yet in emerging Europe and Middle East, unfortunately, where a greater proportion of boards still do not have the representative number of women on the board. That certainly is the opposite is the case in the Nordics market, where the likes of Sweden have the majority of the boards are female. So if you are a female, it may still be a bit of a challenge, but do not despair. And my advice here would be find other female board members to connect, and that normally they would be your own ambassadors. It is not yet right in this part of the world, but that means also there are opportunities. Why? Because of promotion of gender diversity of board level is pretty strong in emerging Europe, as you can see, with 38.1%. We actively promote gender diversity. Does your board consist of individuals with expertise in various areas? Absolutely. That means, to reinforce, they are looking for people with very specific skills and expertise who bring very specific value to the table. General sort of board member doesn't work. They always have to be specific because there's a very specific agenda. So this kind of ratifies the fact that advisory board members are really sought out in this part of the world. The percentage of board consisting of independent directors, not many. Still also not there, but definitely there are spaces out there. As sources of recruitment for NEDs and advisory board members, I just want to qualify that. This is where they source from their own network. So this goes back to my suggestion that for you to reach out to the private equity space. Advent, for example, there's a gentleman is a partner, sits in London, and he's responsible for building all the network parts. So any major appointment at board level that works with Advent across Europe runs through this specific individual. And the first thing that they do is to go through their own network, and all my private equity contacts do the same thing. First, they go to their own network, then they go to external sources. And your external sources would, of course, be your network. You need to have people who know you, who can promote you to those boards. So I strongly urge you to start creating and reaching out very specifically to people in the European areas where you are, whether it's the Middle East or emerging Europe or Western Europe. Do reach out and start building your network there. That's the only way in which you can get the visibility you need. Do you use advisory board? Hell yeah, absolutely. Emerging Europe, Middle East, very similar statistic. And the reason, as I said earlier, it's a far more attractive proposition. A, less cumbersome than a fiduciary board member. B, fit for purpose. 3, from a cost point of view, a lot more flexible. What can you expect as fees paid to board members? And I'm not talking about public boards here. We are talking about family-owned businesses and private equity-run boards. The average fee is between the sort of the 15 to 25, 30,000 euro per annum as a cash element. What really works well for European private equity investors or family-owned businesses is this is what we found. American candidates are more open to this compared to European candidates. European candidates are more interested in a larger cash component. American candidates, in my experience, the people I've spoken to, sometimes, listen, I don't need the cash right now, or I'm happy with a sort of €1,000 a month, or pay me the sort of the attendance fee, but I'm interested in the upside. The cash element, not so important, but if I can facilitate an exit, which is going to generate you 4 or 5 times multiple, if I can open doors and increase your revenue by 20, 30, 40%, I want to have a stake of that, and companies are very, very open to consider that. So this statistic covers the cash basis only, just so you know what you can expect. What is the time commitment? Really not much. It's approximately 2-3 days a month. That's all they need, no more, and that does not necessarily have to be in attendance. One in-person board meeting or in-camera board meeting can also work. In many instances, they'll pick up the phone, I need your consultancy for a day or a couple of hours. So it is not very time consuming, but this certainly is where this is what the board landscape looks like in this part of the world. So with that, I will stop. It is 45, almost an hour, and I would like to open the floor for questions. If you have any, happy to answer. Please type them into the question box, and Ruth will pick them up and moderate.
Thank you so much, Jacques. Here's the first question, and it's from Teresa Hager. When you mentioned that many executives join boards for the last stage of their career, 10 years or so, what is the age range considered an average?
Very good question, Teresa. In this particular case, we are looking at executives from about the 45 age range, could be in the 40s. And the reason for that is there's been a tremendous amount of downsizing, restructuring globally after the financial crisis. A number of those positions were simply not filled. And therefore, a number of executives have found themselves in a situation where, well, that role is not to be found anymore unless if I move to Denmark, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to start looking at board roles. So very often this becomes a career in itself at an earlier stage in their career. But from the sort of 45-ish mark is when people start staking their claim for what next and start building board roles. And as long as those board roles are not presenting a conflict of interest, invariably it does not present a challenge with your current employment either.
Thank you very much. The next question, can you share with us some of your European advisory board success stories?
Yes, the first one, as I mentioned, was the small 3D animation company in Hungary. What happened there is the specific individual that I found in the US, and I presented with a number of candidates. I looked in the media industry, gaming industry, and I found someone in 3D sound. And what they basically did is this individual helped the company realize that having a product is not what the US market needs. The US market is far more interested in the software. The software, the underlying source code is what companies really want. That's where the intellectual property is lying. This is where the patents are lying, not so much in the sort of 3D animation mouse they created. And only because of the knowledge of this individual in the US who understands what the market wants, he helped the company say, let's move away from the actual product side. Let's make our product the source code. Complete re-engineering of the company, and consequently the company is now in a much better place. Other group I worked with is a investment group. They have investment in the Netherlands, Romania, Hungary, Kazakhstan, and slowly moving. They have interest in the US as well. They are focusing on biotechnology, and they needed someone who has expertise A in the US, B in China, to help them explore those markets and bring their business into those specific markets. And the individual I found for them was someone who started a company, took it from startup to a listed company, and obviously that individual is a highly sought after individual, has generated multiple millions of dollars of revenue for his company, and now that caliber of individual is a member of the board of this specific consortium here in this part of the world, and the equivalent of which they've never seen. And they are only too pleased, and many other companies are only too pleased to get someone of your caliber on their boards, because your skill, your experience can simply not be found in the local market.
Thank you. The next question is from Yop Ketting. What about approaching accounting firms? My understanding is that while in US they prohibited from recruiting board members for their clients, this is not the case in Europe. However, websites of accounting firms are opaque. Hard to tell who in the firm would provide referrals or potential board members to their clients. Your thoughts?
Good question, Yab. I've not had that great experience with the accounting firms, and the big four are all my clients in the region. Yes, they advise their clients, and yes, they are often a good source for referrals. The partners could be good as a network, for them to talk, because they are connected at board level, of course, and as they do due diligence or annual audits, and they found there are some governance issues, they may need to look at the at the board structure. That can certainly help. But in my experience, approaching them directly, apart from building a network, has not yielded that many results. The private equity industry, in contrast, has brought infinitely more positive results than the accounting firms.
Thank you. The next question is from Alan Hackney. Although I understand you to say that advisory boards look for very specific expertise, can you generalize the types of skills or functional expertise that firms may find attractive?
Good question, Alan. The mandates that I've worked for range from a number of different industries. So it's certainly not from any one particular industry. The industries certainly would be industrial production, and here would be specifically people who have been involved in major supply chain reorganization internationally, people who have relocated plants from one continent to the other. This would often be a major challenge for big industrial organizations. In the case of life sciences or medical appliances, this part of the world is huge in startups. They all want their business to go to the US. So one of the things they're looking for there, Alan, would be people who can facilitate market entry, door opening, business development. These are very, very key areas for them. And if I have to say that what is perhaps the biggest go-to would be people that bring international best practice in the industry in which they work and the market entry. These probably are the two big ones. From a sort of life sciences point of view, in pharmaceutical, I haven't seen much. There's been mostly in biotech. Technology has been also market entry to a large extent. So these are the two main ones, market entry. And so I would not say any particular functional expertise. Certainly they need you to have worked at operations level, and the marketing is another big area, so PR marketing, where you can help to brand the business and help resolve their branding issue or upgrade their branding to prepare them for a launch in the market. For example, the specific, and I have 3 instances in emerging Europe where their presence that they had was simply just not up to scratch. It really looked like a third world country business, and they would not have had the sort of 5 minutes of anyone's time in the US. So it required a complete redesign of their presence, so to speak. So marketing, sales, strategy, these are, from a functional point of view, I guess, the more important ones.
Thank you. And the next question is from Atmaram. From your point of view, how important is local language expertise for either board positions or advisory positions in Europe?
Atmaram, very good question. From all the mandates that I've done, none whatsoever. What does work, though, is very often, in the case of the real estate business in Bulgaria I referred to earlier, the individual that I placed had previous experience and knowledge of that region, so he understood how they think, how they work, and he has seen the other side of the table. That normally is a good positive advantage. So if you have spent time in Europe, that is a very strong advantage, and you can showcase that and you can use that as your direct go-to. Language skills has never ever been a factor, purely because the board would speak English. There's invariably a private equity player involved. They want to go to the US in any way, so therefore it has to be English. So not an issue as far as what I've seen so far. Obviously, if you do speak Turkish, for example, and you want to approach Turkish clients, wow, that's a huge bonus, but it's a nice to have, not a have to have.
Thank you. Another question from Venu Japur. What's more important, corporate achievements or cultural mix or SME expertise? Which one weighs more in a selection? And is there any order of preference identified by the region, say known tendencies in Europe or Middle East, for example?
Very good question. I would venture to say that the corporate expertise is corporate SME, either or. If you are talking to a public board, obviously the corporate expertise would be more prevalent. If you're looking at a family-owned business, it's not necessarily that you understand what their business is all about. They need you to bring the industry best practice from your market as to what should work. Cultural fit is often a very, very important part. Where my clients have asked me to source board members in the US, preference has been for people with previous experience or knowledge of their part of the world. The reason why cultural expertise is good is if you are sitting on a Turkish board or a Middle Eastern board or a board of Russian sort of origin or former USSR, the Stans and Georgias, if it's good if you understand the protocols, you understand the people, you understand the business mindset. That is a distinct advantage for you to be considered for a board seat there. So my final answer there would be cultural fit is a very strong factor in the selection process. More stronger, I would imagine, say 30% cultural, 70% would be or 80% even the functional expertise.
Thank you. And the final question is from Jaap Ketting. Question regarding taxation of board fees. Do you end up having a tax liability in the host country where the company is based? What is the easiest way to deal with this?
Good question, Jaap, and a very, very pertinent and important question. In all the instances, specifically as an advisory board, there is a contractual relationship between you or your company, whether you have a BV or whatever company you have. So you need to have a tax identity in the US or whichever market you are, with which you contract directly with the company in this part of the world. And that is good enough. They will transfer the fee to you by telegraphic transfer, and your tax liability is only in the US. If you're a US citizen, you have no tax liability because the fees are not paid to you in that market. Even in the case of a non-executive director, there was a contractual arrangement. This is not an employment status, and only if there is an employment status, in my experience, would there be a tax liability or component. But I have not seen any instances where a local tax issue arises from a board appointment.
Thank you, Jacques. That's the last question. Joanna? Unmute yourself.
Thank you, Jacques. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I can indeed, Joanna.
That was excellent, really excellent. And I think everyone who is listening got a lot out of it, and we'd love to have you back again.
With my absolute pleasure, Joanna. It's been a pleasure for everyone on the call today. Thank you so much for listening. And all that remains is for me to wish you a fantastic day ahead. You have my contact details. It's on the screen. I think Joanna could also circulate. Very happy if you reach out to me if you have a question, if you have ideas. Very, very happy to talk to you. So this is an open invitation. Feel free, reach out, and if I can help, I can. Thank you very much for the opportunity and look forward to next time.
Excellent. Thank you, Jacques. Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.